ATV120, it is a pleasure to be here for this wonderful occasion. We have a stellar cast for this opening event, a panel discussion of the science and music of Interstellar. The moderator is a professor of physics at Manchester University and a well-known presenter of science shows on BBC television and radio, Dr. Brian Cox.
Woo!
Dr. Cox is joined by Interstellar's director and screenwriter, the man who crafted Interstellar into the great film that it is, Christopher Nolan. We also have the man who composed the wonderful music for Interstellar and for 4 of Christopher Nolan's other great films, Zimmer. And finally, I am pleased to introduce a close friend of mine. A man with whom I have made famous bets, argued about physics, and spent many happy days. He is a physics professor at Caltech, but more importantly, for Interstellar, he was the science advisor and an executive producer, Dr. Kip Thorne.
Woo!
Thank you, and thank you, Professor Hawkey, for that introduction. We've not got a huge amount of time, so I want to get straight into it. And the first question, I think, to you, Chris, is that this is a film that is genuinely based on science. The plot relies on the science. And also, I think, to me, it's a film that's a celebration of science. So why did you want to make it?
Well, I came to the project relatively late, and I would say it's not so much a film that the plot relies on science, as it's defined by science. And Kip was involved as an executive producer from a very early stage, and he and my brother collaborated on the initial draft of the screenplay. And I continued that collaboration when I took over the writing. And really, the initial impulse was to look outwards, to look at what are the possibilities of the science out there in the greater universe. Because there's so much more exotic, so much more fascinating than the screenwriting can come up with, and more surprising as well. So we always try to, in every aspect of the film, look at what the real science offered first, and see if that would present an exciting opportunity for the audience.
There's also an element, I think, of polemic, particularly at the start. There are speeches in there about exploration, value of exploration. So did you make it as a partly polemical, at least?
It's certainly made as a response to the phenomena that I think we felt it very much when we put out Inception. Inception is a film you know, Hans and I worked on it together. It's about looking inwards. It's about dreams within dreams. It's about the microscopic and getting lost in those worlds. And so we felt that whatever the technological progress has been going on in the last couple of decades, a lot of it has been about what's in our pockets, what's in our living rooms, communication devices, this kind of thing. And Interstellar really tries to take the view of maybe it's time to start looking outwards again. Maybe it's time to start looking back at the ambitions of children when I was a child, which being an astronaut, you know, getting out there into outer space was one of the highest aspirations. And it felt like that had gone away. It felt like some of that spirit had been lost. And so Interstellar certainly, I don't know if I would describe it as a polemic, but it certainly tries to suggest that there's great value in that, great value in science and the science that leads us to explore the universe. That we'll never hit a moment where we say, what's here on Earth is enough for us, it's all we need to know. So it definitely tries to look out into that.
Hans, we were talking backstage actually, and I said to you, what would you like to talk about? Music, of course. But you said to me, I also want to talk about the fact that the film is a celebration of scientists.
Absolutely. I mean, that comes from my father was a scientist, and I think it's so amazing to be able to put scientists front and center, not the geeky sidekick, but that we really were making a movie and making scientists the heroes. And the way this, I don't know, you know, there's a way Chris and I work together, which is that every time he tries to find a slightly different way of sort of tripping me up and interesting me in the process of the story. And this time, Chris came to, we ran into each other somewhere, and he said, if you were to write me one page without telling me what the movie was about, would I give him one day and write him a piece of music? And I received this beautiful letter, typewritten on a beautiful old typewriter. And really it was the story of a father and his child. And Chris knows, I mean, we have spent enough time together that my son's ambition, who is here tonight, is to be a scientist. So this story touched me deeply. And I wrote this small little piece for Chris, and I asked him to come down and have a listen to it. And he came over, and when I play something to somebody for the first time, I can't actually look at them because I'm too fragile. So I played it to him and sort of went in my typical way. So what do you think, Chris? And I think you paused for a moment and said something like, well, suppose I better make the movie now. And I said, what is the movie? And that's when he started to talk about the idea of looking outwards. We've looked inwards, now let's look upwards. And this idea of this vast canvas he was presenting to me. And at one point I think I interrupted and I said, but I've written you this tiny, tiny little fragile piece about, you know, a father and his child. And he goes, but that's really the heart of the story. So I think part of what great science does, it keeps humanity forever in its focus. And I think that's what I loved about this movie.
It's interesting you say that actually, because one of the, I thought the music was beautiful and subtle. And it's interesting that you say you started with that, not a kind of an epic piece of music. It's not like Pirates of the Caribbean or something where this big thing, but you started with that small central relationship.
But that's, you know, that's what it's all about. And I just really would like to point this out in front of all of you, that Chris and I make this music together. You know, it's like, the only way I can describe it is we're sort of this band, and you can disagree with me, I mean, you probably will, but there comes a certain point in our process of halfway through making the movie where we've virtually reversed roles, where you're talking more about the music and the functions of the music, and I talk more about the story, and
I think that's very, very accurate.
You know,
it's one of the reasons why I think, for me, the collaborations are very much with Interstellar. The things we've done together, the music is inextricably linked with the film. You can't pull it apart. It's not something that's layered on afterwards. It's something that's grown with the rest of the movie. Hans is one of the key collaborators, along with my director of photography, my actors, my designer. You know, we do everything together. And I think when you get to sequence like Tesseract in the end, that represents a very intensive collaboration between effects supervisor and set designer and hands and everything coming together to try and express the inexpressible. Kip also very much involved with looking at those ideas of extra dimensionality and how time can be represented as a spatial dimension. You know, really trying to bring a lot of things to bear in one sequence.
I think Kip, because you refer to the Tesseract, I know that that's you've got some slides, I think. The people were saying to me, you can't let him show slides. Kip is one of the great physicists in the world, so he will show slides if he wants.
You don't expect to see things like this in Royal Albert Hall, do you? Well, I guess you're a special audience. So the Tesseract, those of you who have not seen the movie, we've promised we will try not to introduce any spoilers, but the Tesseract appears near the end of the film. A Tesseract is a cube in 4 space dimensions. So if you look on the left, that's what a cube looks like normally to you, but if you go up close to one face of the cube, and you're looking in, then you see the far face smaller than the front face, and you see the other 4 faces around the sides. So now imagine carrying that to one higher dimension. If you have a cube in 4 dimensions instead of 3, it will look like a central cube, which is the far cube, in place of the far square. And then 6 cubes around it, and then a cube that you're looking in through. So that's kind of weird. So you have a Tesseract of that sort, and you... a very interesting thing about this Tesseract, now I've taken away one of the dimensions for just a moment, is that it can travel up in 4-dimensional space. The way Chris wrote the screenplay, you have 5 dimensions. You have 3 dimensions, north, south, east, west, up, down, of ordinary space. You have time, which is the 4th dimension, and the 5th dimension is what I would call out back. It's going out away from our 3-dimensional spatial universe up in one more spatial dimension. Physicists call this the bulk, but in the movie you'll hear it over and over again, the 5th dimension. You get up in the 5th dimension, and this Tesseract can travel across the universe. The universe is, you see here, is down below. The distance across the universe, up there in the bulk, is only about the same as the distance between the Earth and the Sun, but down in our brain, in our universe, it's 10 billion light years. It's amazing. So you can travel in a Tesseract up in the bulk, all the way across the universe, from the far reaches back to Earth. Wow. And the Tesseract can then dock alongside a bedroom. We won't say whose bedroom, but we can. There's pretty much a spoiler there. Get rid of it. And so you see a guy floating, and this guy is looking through faces of the Tesseract, looks up and looks down on that girl's head, who's in the other face of the Tesseract. If he looks down, the light ray is coming to him from her feet. If he looks to the left, the light ray is coming from her right side, and so forth. And so to him, to this guy who's floating in that face of the Tesseract, now this is kind of mind-bending, and this is the way his mind worked. Just
I've always been fascinated by those ideas in science that take you outside of things we can see and hear, the dimensions, the 3 dimensions, the 4 dimensions that we know, these ideas that there are higher dimensions that we can intuit. I love the idea that maybe we're seeing artifacts of those dimensions that we don't yet understand. So
here's the artifact.
Here's the artifact, time being a higher dimension that we can experience, but we can't see it, feel it, taste it.
And so on the right, this is the way the guy floating sees it. He doesn't see this Tesseract, the 4 space dimensions. He sees the girl, 6 iterations of the girl, 4 around, 1 above and 1 below. 6, that they are simultaneous iterations of the same girl, just seen from this higher dimension. So you're looking at, imagine this in a blockbuster movie that sold 100 million tickets worldwide, these kinds of concepts, that took guts.
What I find interesting as well is that, so we're dealing with, certainly towards the end, not ideas of time travel as much as the fact that the past, present and future are present to be observed, which is true as far as we know in Einstein's theory of general relativity. But what I found fascinating was the way that you dealt with the paradoxes that can appear. The moment you have a movie with time travel, you can get paradoxes. Such, for example, if you could travel back in time, you could go and prevent your grandparents from meeting, and so there's some paradoxes in it. But I found the way you dealt with that fascinating.
Well, you're right. Anytime you deal with time as an accessible dimension of any sort, you get into the realm of paradox. But the more we thought about it and talked about it, and the more I became fascinated by the idea of viewing time as a spatial dimension, or potentially as a spatial dimension, if it could be observed from a fifth dimension. If you could be a fifth dimensional being looking at our world, as Anne Hathaway's character says at one point, the past might be a canyon you can climb down into, the future might be a mountain you can climb up. The interesting thing about that to me, as it relates to fate, destiny, free will, we were talking about earlier, you were asking about, the attitude towards free will that the film has. Well, really, all that it's saying is, if you can view time as a spatial dimension from a higher dimension, your entire concept of free will is invalid. It becomes something else, something we can't know because we aren't able to access a fifth dimension. But you take away the idea of cause and effect, because cause and effect is defined temporally. And so when you remove that relationship, or you view it from a higher dimension, whatever's going to replace that will answer your question about free will and destiny. The great thing is in making a movie, we don't have to have the answer. We just have to be able to intelligently pose the question and suggest that we might not be hidebound by our current thinking in terms of cause and effect. We have a means, by telling a story on film, of suggesting a way in which we might transcend conventional ideas of cause and effect.
Kip, those ideas, if we're going to have a universe with extra spatial dimensions, which indeed we're looking for at the Large Hadron Collider, for example, so that's not necessarily science fiction, and if we're going to have a universe with wormholes, which we'll talk about in a moment, do we have to modify our view of what free will is and what the way humans behave? Do you have to replace that with some kind of consistency criteria?
So I struggled with this some years ago, actually triggered by Carl Sagan's movie Contact, which led me to start thinking about time travel. And as a theoretical physicist, I may as well hang up my hat and abandon the enterprise if it's possible for me to go backward in time and kill my grandfather before my mother was conceived. And so if I go backward in time, physics makes no sense, the laws of the universe make no sense unless everything is self-consistent, which means no free will in some sense. And so I basically decided that that's the way it's got to be, or else there are no physical laws and nothing works.
So you decided that you have no free will?
This is a kind of conversation between Chris and me. He draws me up quickly. I'll shut up.
Did you get involved in these? This sounds like a great way
in a strange way, because these questions were posed to me constantly. And of course, I work in a medium which is far more abstract. And at one point, I did sit down and try to consolidate the differences between the relativity theory, gravity, time, and quantum mechanics. And there's a piece of music that goes through the movie. One of these days I'm actually going to sit down and explain really how it works with you. Because there's an element which is gravity, which actually, this could be too long a conversation. But ultimately, what it became is, it became a love theory. And which is something that Chris suggested in the movie anyway. And it has this, whenever we get into serious science, I wrote a heart from the heart. I wrote a love theme, and that seemed to be sort of my way of consolidating these different theories.
So to me, the remarkable thing about this movie, Chris, is that you crafted something which involves in very deep ways all of these different branches of the fundamental laws of physics. You have quantum physics, which governs the singularity inside of a black hole, which is the clue to solving a major problem that humanity faces in the film. So you have quantum physics combined with gravity physics inside the black hole, laws of quantum gravity, which we don't fully understand yet. You have the relativity theory, you have amazingly different rates of flow of time in different places. You have the distortion of space around black holes and then wormholes. All of this integrated into one film, and I just find it remarkable that you were able to do that.
What I also, Chris, find remarkable is you use relativity, the effects of relativity, so time dilation, really is a powerful emotional driver in the film. I don't want to give too much away, but it's
well, it comes back to what we were talking about earlier about higher dimensions of time, and the film takes the view. Kip and I talked about this at an early stage. We said we're considering time to be the fourth dimension. We're considering time to be a higher dimension, fourth dimension, of which our human experience of time is incomplete. We're feeling something that we can't fully grasp and we can't see from a higher perspective. And yet it's the truth of it and the reality of it is undeniable, and we feel it in all of our experience, our relationships, having children, growing, aging, ultimately dying. And so it's undeniable, but it's very, very mysterious. And as soon as you start viewing time in that way, time becomes, I mean, in the film they refer to it as, they need to look at it as a resource, like oxygen, food, water, whatever. And that's not entirely dissimilar to what we were doing at the conceptual stage, and saying time is going to be a character in this film. And a lot of my films will address time from a narrative point of view, from a storytelling point of view. But this is the first time I've ever really got to address it as a concrete character, really, a strong feature of the narrative that's just inextricably linked with it, really. I mean, I had an interesting conversation with Richard Linklater recently, who's wonderful from Boyhood. When I saw it, I felt all kinds of strange similarities to what we were doing in Interstellar, even though the films could not be more different. And he'd actually noticed the same thing when he saw Interstellar, which I thought was really, really fun, because it really is a question of, you know, how do you try and grapple with this experience that we all live through, that we're all imprisoned by, of time. And so all of the aspects of the science that Kip could suggest to me, present me with, in terms of how you would have a real world situation, a real life situation, in which time is running differently for different rates. And of course, one of the things that I like to point out to people, because Kip pointed out to me and it absolutely blew my mind, is that idea of relativity, the idea of time running at different rates, is one of the key components of the GPS on your phone working. And so those GPS satellites, the differential, the clocking differential, that has to be in place or they wouldn't work. So we use every day something that actually uses this idea that seems impossible to us. The time will run differently under different conditions in different places.
I know, Kip, you had a great challenge as the advisor on the film, because the planet that orbits the black hole Gargantua, you have 7 years to the hour. Yeah. And I know you'd said to me that you thought that might be impossible.
Yeah, well, it was a conversation between Chris and me. I think maybe the second time we met, could have even been the first time we met other than socially, where you told me you wanted to have people on this planet that was near a black hole have 1 hour elapse, while 7 years are elapsing back on Earth or up very high above the black hole. I said to you, I don't think that would work. And he said, Chris said, go home and think about it, sleep on it. And he knew to tell me that, because we've done the rounds on other things, and I've done the rounds with his brother, Jonah, on other issues, where they, as creative filmmakers, would have an idea, and I would say it probably won't work, and they would challenge me to go find a way to make it work, and almost always I did. And in this case, I went home and slept on it, and I did a calculation. I found I was completely wrong. all my intuition was based on a non-spinning black hole, but if you have a black hole that spins very, very fast, then it creates a whirling tornado of space around itself, which helps hold the planet out, so it can be much closer to the surface of the black hole than it would otherwise be, because it's being held out, flung out by whirling space, attracted by gravity. And it can be close enough that 1 hour is 7 years back on Earth. It was amazing to me. When the movie came out, a number of bloggers wrote in the first days when the movie came out, it's impossible. They were making the same mistake as I had made. And they hadn't yet read my book where I explain it.
I was saying about Kip's process there, where we would, talk about things or not have disagreements, but sort of say, okay, well, is this possible? Is it not possible? He wouldn't ever really say, no, that's not possible. He would always want, whether I told him to or not, to go away and do actual calculations and research. And there were times when I would bring him an idea that I had got from one of his books that had given me and said, read this section, have a look at this in black hole. I'll come back and go, this is great. We're putting this in the script, this feature. And he would say, well, hang on, I have to go check that it's valid. And I said, but it's your theory, it's your idea. He didn't distinguish in any way. He said, no, but I've got to go look at what the current thinking is, what papers have been published, whether the mathematics were still hold up. And what I was so struck by in that is the humility of the true scientist in the face of nature. And it's one of the wonderful things I got to learn on this project, that science has that wonderful humility. It's what elevates it above, I think, other forms.
Brian knows, as a physicist, you're proved wrong nearly every day. It's a subject where the read is a true answer, and you get to come up and so often you have no choice but to be humble.
I think it's to deny you to be interested in wrong is probably the heart of science, isn't it? So, then we talked about so the black hole itself is depicted in an interesting way, and I believe you wrote computer code to do that, so it wasn't just graphics, is that right? So I've read that it was based on a real simulation.
Yeah, what I did was put Kip together with Paul Franklin, our visual effects supervisor. Oh, he's here. But what I said to Kip was, okay, here's Paul, you go and give him the real equations. He's got the sophisticated software, sophisticated hardware that would allow us to render it as per the real equations. What I said to Paul is, have a go at this. If it looks any good, we'll use it. If it doesn't, let me know and I'll talk to him. But no, they had an incredible collaboration that you should speak to.
Yeah, no, it was a fabulous collaboration. I gave Paul and his team the equations for propagation of light bundles, of light beams around through the curved space and time around a black hole or around a wormhole, through a wormhole, so that they could take whatever there was, say, around the black hole, like a disk of hot gas. They could propagate the light from the disk to the camera and see tell what the camera would actually see. And so that was one of the wonderful examples in this film. If I could have the graphics up, let me just show you. So here we have Gargantua, a gigantic black hole. There's a disk of very hot gas around it, a lot like Saturn's rings. If you put the camera there, and it looks at the disk, if a light beam coming from the upper back face of the disk is pulled by the warped space and time around the black hole, up and around the black hole and down to the camera. And so the camera will see the upper back face of the disk wrapped up over the top of the black hole. Amazing. The bottom face of the disk, the light ray goes down under the black hole and up to the camera. And so you're going to see the bottom face of the disk wrapped around the bottom of the black hole, so that's what it looks like. It's really quite amazing. You see the front face of the disk coming right around the front, but the back face split in two and going up and over and down under. So Chris was very happy with this. There really should have been put on a Doppler shift where the gas moving toward you is shifted to the blue and made brighter, and that going away from you is shifted to the red and made dimmer. But that is not quite as convincing to a mass audience of 100 million people around the world as to what's really going on. Chris preferred to get rid of that. You can comment on that, I guess, Chris, and go back to this. Because this he felt would be more compelling to the audience. This is one of the compromises in the science that Chris chose to make.
I think you may be right, but I actually believe, and Paul will have to shout out from the audience, because
So he's going to argue with me about what this looks like.
Well, why not let them see the process, right? No, my gut instinct is that with the latitude of film stock and the lenses we're using, that all of that material would be too bright for that differential to really register on film anyway, if we were in a spaceship actually photographing it with visible elements in it as well. I don't have any science to back that up whatsoever, but it feels...
It depends on the spectrum. If this is a cold disk, which in fact it is, if it's a hot disk, you're going to fry the astronauts with the cosmic rays off. If it's a cold disk, I think it'll look like that, or a hot disk, I would agree with you, but you're going to fry your astronauts. Anyways, so he wasn't satisfied with this. So I would have stopped at this point. But he said, look, you're seeing this through the lens of an IMAX camera, and that bright light from that disc is going to scatter inside the lens of the IMAX camera and smear everything out. And he insisted that his team at Double Negative put that in, so that it really would be as the camera would see it. And so this is the iconic image of the black hole we see in the film, with the light scattering that gives this glow.
Well, and that's sort of the essence of what we're talking about here with the topic. Because what's important to me in visual effects, and Paul will know this, it's the point of boredom, but what I know is going on about is, what would the technology we're using, its inadequacies, with lens scattering, light scattering on the lens and ghosting and veiling flares and all those things that we deal with. And so one of the things we did actually, when we knew what the design of it was, is we got a 20K line, we put a metal disc in front of it. It's about the same size. We photographed it, with the actor in the foreground, so that Paul's team had something that was of sufficient brightness that if you were actually trying to balance your exposure in the foreground, you get. And the visual effects are sort of, based on that. So we're just trying to ride that line between explaining things visually to the audience so they can understand it, but making it feel like we really had a camera and we went there and we photographed it.
When you write the music for those parts of the film, let's say the journey through the wormhole when you approach going out to it, are you thinking more about the emotional journey the astronauts are on at the time, and you're thinking about the plot? So are you really thinking about, I'm going to represent this most violent of natural phenomena in the music, reflect that?
Well, I mean, the whole movie in one way or the other is a journey, on so many different levels. And that was, of course, the ultimate journey, plus that idea that you had to leave something behind, which was very important. I think at that point, it was strictly just, my brain was exploding with the science, with the possibilities, etc. And I was just holding on to Chris for dear life to try to sort of guide me through this quite possibly fatal, whatever. But really,
Quite possibly fatal.
yeah, I think there's a motto we use throughout this movie, this is not a time for caution. So everything we approach. I mean, I think, Kip, you'll agree that probably meeting Chris means this is not a time for caution. We're just going to go for it. We're going to go for the impossible. And at the same time, I mean, because we started, remember, I started out writing about my children. There's always, at the back of my mind, there's always what is the emotional toll? What's the, you know, can I represent what the science represents truly as an emotional toll? Can I bring this sort of force into it? And so, yes, there are so many things to think about.
I know Kip mentioned Carl Sagan there, and I know, because you mentioned Carl Sagan, as we grew up roughly the same time, didn't we? And there's a quote that I love, a Carl Sagan quote, which to me resonated, or the film reminded me of it, which is for small creatures such as we, the vastness is bearable only through love. I think it's a beautiful statement of the sort of insignificance in a physical sense of the human race, but actually perhaps their profound significance. And I found that the film, to me, spoke to that. It spoke to the value of the human race.
Well, I grew up, you know, watching the original Cosmos that Carl Sagan did. It made a huge impression on me, and it stayed with me ever since. Really, I've shown it to my kids now. I think that one of the things that he sort of cracked in that series, and certainly something that's very influential on Interstellar, it's really the idea that if science is our method of exploring and explaining everything in the universe, then it has to accommodate concepts of wonder and awe and love, all of the things that drive us, the emotional side of us and everything, and it has to eventually find a vocabulary to explain these things or embrace these things. And so where the film goes with that, it's very analogous to the idea of time in the film, time being an artifact of a higher dimension. And Brand, you know, then later in the film, she chooses to express the same idea about love, that love might be an artifact of a higher dimension, it might be something, the connections between human beings might seem very different, viewed from a higher dimension where you have a full comprehension of the four dimensions that we live in and are imprisoned essentially in our own subjective point of view of time and connectivity. And I think Cosmos absolutely was a fundamental thing in putting that thinking about what science can be in my head.
Kip, did you find that, well, I have this question, how did you find the process of working with a filmmaker so intensively, and also working with the actors, actually?
I think the key thing with working with Chris closely and with Joan and his brother beforehand is you're working with people who are extremely creative, brilliant, see the world very differently than I do. They're not scientists, but they bring to the table insights, an openness of mind and insights that I would not see with a slightly more hidebound point of view that's tied into just the particular way that I've thought about the physics. So, returning to the Tesseract, Chris is taking time and expressing it in as a spatial dimension so that if you fly through the Tesseract, you're moving forward in time relative to the Earth. If you fly back in an opposite direction through the Tesseract, you're moving through time relative to the Earth backwards, because he has made the time on the Earth into a spatial dimension relative to, as seen by somebody in the bulk in the fifth dimension. This may sound like gibberish to you. Go read my book.
He's got lots of plugs
I
in
learned it
his
from Chris, and I put it down in the book. But the key thing is that Chris had a totally different point of view that he brought to the table, and that challenged me to think things through and see things in a manner I'd never seen before, and thereby opened my eyes. And that doesn't happen when I'm talking to a physicist in quite the same way, because the physicist and I speak the same language. The physicist doesn't bring these new points of view to the table.
I worked on a film years ago now called Sunshine, Danny Boyle, and worked with the actors. What I found, the journey I went on, it was almost like psychoanalysis. You know, it was very good for me. as a physicist, but also actually as an emotional being to understand how powerful some of these ideas are. You forget sometimes. I wondered whether you found the same thing, that it added to you emotionally as well as technically.
Well, emotionally, it certainly added to my humility. It added the emotional experience of being challenged by Chris or Jonah, going home, thinking about it, suddenly seeing something I hadn't seen. I mean, it was a joyful experience working with them. And it was just the joy of discovering these new points of view and what I could get from it.
We're coming towards the end actually. I just want to ask you, Chris, if you had, as well as making obviously a great film and a scientifically accurate film, were you trying to say something to the audience, because I've been asked questions actually before Never Red Carpets, and the journalist said, do you think this film will inspire a generation of physicists because of those ideas, they want to find more? What was that in your mind?
You know, you would never set out to make a film with a primary impulse to sort of be didactic or have a message. So, you know, if you want to send a message, use Western Union, you know, don't make a film. There was Sam Goldwyn, one of those great moguls. But there's truth there, which is you have to approach it first and film this from the point of view of story and what excites you. And what excited me about this was the science, the potential for storytelling. But as we embarked on it as a project, there's a part of you that remembers things like Cosmos that stuck with me and made me interested in those aspects of the world. And you start to feel a responsibility, I put it that way, as saying, okay, well, if we're going to call a film Interstellar, if we're going to, you know, address some of these cosmic issues, we want to be doing it in a way that's inspirational. We want to be doing it in a way that makes it feel important to people, that explains the significance of it. And so what I say to that is, let's get a huge organ, and it's like, if not now, when? It's like, what's ever going to be big enough in a film to justify it, if not a black hole, if not, you know. And then, of course, Hans confounds you by using the big organ for the small moments, and the small piano for the huge moments. But any way you slice it up, you're bringing everything to bear. You're really trying to go out there and make it as big and comprehensive a statement as you can.
Yeah, well, I think that I'm going to get shouted at if I don't draw this to a close. I'm told that you have about half an hour. You should be back at 7:30 if I have to get a drink for the film. And you've got to convert to
do a bit of work.
Yes.